The Georgia's sun hadn't fully risen when Lieutenant Autumn Blackwood stepped onto the firing range at Fort Benning, but the heat was already climbing. 42 SEAL candidates stood in formation behind her, their shadows stretching long across the red clay dirt. She was the only woman among them, and every single man knew it. Commander Thaddeus Kane stood at the observation tower, clipboard in hand, his jaw set in that particular way that suggested he'd already made his decision. His voice carried across the range like a crack of thunder. Blackwood, front and center. Autumn moved with the kind of economy that comes from years of training. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She positioned herself at the firing line, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing controlled. The Barrett M82 rifle waited on the bench beside her. 50 pounds of American engineering that could put a bullet through an engine block at a mile. Kane descended from the tower, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The other candidates shifted nervously. They'd all heard the stories about Kane, how he'd washed out 3 female candidates in the past year alone, how his father had been some big shot at the CIA back in the day, how he believed, deep in his bones, that women didn't belong in Tier 1 operations. He stopped 3 feet from Autumn, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You've completed Bood/S," he said, his tone suggesting this was somehow an accident. "Congratulations, but passing training doesn't make you a SEAL. This final test will." The range master wheeled out 15 targets downrange, not the standard paper silhouettes. These were advanced, robotic mannequins, capable of random movement patterns, dressed in civilian clothes to simulate real-world scenarios. 900 yards out, in the crosswind that was already picking up speed, the flags on the tower snapped and popped like rifle shots. 15 targets, Kane continued, 90 seconds. Standard passing score is 10 out of 15. He paused, letting the silence build. "For you, Blackwood, the requirement is 14 out of 15. A murmur rippled through the candidates behind her. Even the most skilled marksman in the group knew that was nearly impossible. The wind was gusting to 18 miles per hour now, variable direction. The targets would be moving unpredictably. 90 seconds meant almost no time to adjust between shots. Kane leaned in slightly. "Your father was a great Marine. Shame you're not." The words landed like a punch, but Autumn's face remained perfectly still. "Captain Dale Blackwood, United States Marine Corps, killed in action in Fallujah, 2004. She'd been 16 when they'd handed her the folded flag. 21 years later, the memory still cut like broken glass. She said nothing, just moved to the firing position, settled behind the Barrett, and began her breathing cycle. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. The technique Master Chief Garrett Hawthorne had drilled into her 1,000 times. The range master's voice crackled over the speaker. "Targets active in 3, 2, 1, commence firing." The mannequins jerked into motion, their movements erratic and lifelike. Autumn's world narrowed to the circle of her scope. Wind speed, 17 miles per hour, shifting northeast to east. Temperature rising, air density changing. She made microscopic adjustments, her fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. First shot. The lead mannequin's head snapped back. Clean hit. Second shot. Another drop. The rhythm building now. 3, 4, 5, 6. The candidates behind her had gone silent. Even Kane had stopped smirking. What Autumn was doing wasn't just skilled shooting. It was something else entirely. Each shot fired before the previous target had fully fallen, the rifle's recoil absorbed and controlled, the follow-through perfect. 7, 8, 9, 10. 70 seconds gone. 5 targets remaining. The wind gusted hard, 22 miles per hour now, pushing from the southwest. Autumn adjusted, her body moving as one unit with the weapon. This wasn't mechanical. This was instinct forged from 10,000 hours of practice. 11, 12, 13. 14. 82 seconds elapsed. One target left. 8 seconds remaining. The final mannequin wore a tactical vest marked with a Taliban insignia, moving in a serpentine pattern that would challenge any shooter in the world. Autumn tracked it through her scope, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. The wind shifted again. The target zagged left. She exhaled slowly, squeezed. The shot broke clean. The bullet flew downrange, and for a fraction of a second, Autumn saw it clearly in her mind. The trajectory, the arc, the inevitable impact. The mannequin's torso sensor remained dark. Miss. The range went silent. Autumn stood, her face betraying nothing, and safed the weapon. 14 out of 15. By any standard in the world, it was exceptional shooting. But it wasn't 15. Kane's smile was slow and satisfied. 14 isn't 15, Blackwood. You're out. The other candidates didn't cheer. A few looked away, uncomfortable. One or two shook their heads. They'd all just witnessed something extraordinary, and they knew it. But rules were rules, and Kane had the authority. Autumn nodded once. Yes, sir. She turned to walk off the range, and that's when the voice stopped her. Check the scoring system, Commander. Every head swiveled toward the observation tower. Master Chief Garrett Hawthorne stood at the railing, his white beard catching the morning light. 70 years old if he was a day, but his posture remained ramrod straight, his eyes sharp as broken glass. Kane's jaw tightened. Master Chief, the sensors clearly show. I said check the system. Garrett's voice carried the weight of 40 years in naval special warfare. Humor an old man. The range master hurried to his console, pulling up the camera feeds on a tablet. Garrett descended from the tower with the careful deliberation of someone whose body no longer obeyed quite as quickly as his mind demanded. He'd taught hand-to-hand combat for 3 decades, trained 2 generations of SEALs, and somewhere along the way, he'd taken a special interest in a 16-year-old girl whose father had just been killed in Iraq. He took the tablet from the range master and zoomed in on target 15. The high-definition camera showed the mannequin in perfect detail. The torso sensor was indeed dark, but Garrett's finger moved up, tracing the line of the neck. There, a perfect hole, slightly left of center. The bullet had severed the mannequin's articulated spine mechanism, the component designed to simulate a catastrophic kill shot that standard sensors couldn't register. Lieutenant Blackwood aimed for the neck, Garrett said quietly, turning the screen so Kane could see. Standard torso sensors only read center mass hits. She just demonstrated advanced target neutralization, the kind of shot that saves lives in hostage situations. Kane's face went through several shades of red. The parameters were to neutralize 15 targets, Garrett interrupted, which she did, in 84 seconds, with wind conditions that would challenge any shooter in this command. The two men stared at each other. Decades of military protocol and chain of command hung in the air between them. Finally, Kane stepped back. Blackwood, he said through clenched teeth, you pass. Congratulations. The candidates erupted in cheers. Autumn turned, found Garrett's eyes, and gave him the smallest nod. He returned it, then turned and walked back toward the tower, moving with the careful gait of someone who was carrying more than just age. 3 hours later, after the candidates had been dismissed and the range had gone quiet, Autumn found Garrett sitting on the bench outside the armory. He was staring at nothing in particular, a paper coffee cup forgotten in his hand. You didn't have to do that, she said, settling beside him. Yes, I did. Kane's going to make my life hell now. Kane's been making your life hell since day one. Garrett took a sip of coffee, grimaced at how cold it had gotten. This just means you get to prove him wrong for the next 20 years, instead of walking away today. Autumn smiled despite herself. Garrett had been the constant in her life since her father died, not a replacement. Dale Blackwood could never be replaced. But something else, a teacher, a guardian, a voice of reason when the world stopped making sense. How are you feeling? She asked. The question hung between them. They both knew what it meant. 6 months ago, Garrett had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Decades of exposure to burn pits and chemical agents had finally caught up with him. The doctors had given him a year, maybe less. "I'm fine," he said, which they both knew was a lie. "Garrett, I need you to come to the cabin tonight," he said, cutting her off. "There's something we need to discuss." The tone in his voice made Autumn's instincts prickle. She'd learned to read Garrett's moods over the years. This wasn't casual. This was mission planning voice. The same tone he'd used when teaching her how to survive SEER training, how to operate behind enemy lines, how to make the hard choices that kept you alive when everything went sideways. "What is it?" "Not here." Garrett stood, moving with that careful deliberation again. 200 hours. Come alone." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her sitting on the bench with a dozen questions and no answers. Garrett's cabin sat 40 miles north of Fort Benning, deep in the pine forests where the red clay gave way to granite outcroppings, and the silence was broken only by birdsong and wind. Autumn had been here 100 times over the years, for training sessions that left her exhausted and enlightened, for quiet dinners where Garrett taught her about honor and duty and the cost of both. She pulled her truck into the gravel driveway at exactly 2000 hours. The cabin was dark except for a single light in the main room. Garrett's old Ford sat under the carport, covered in a thin layer of pollen. He opened the door before she could knock. "Coffee?" he offered. "Sure." They settled at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak surface where Garrett had taught her to field strip an M4 when she was 17. Where he'd helped her fill out her Naval Academy application, where he'd told her, with brutal honesty, exactly what it would cost to become the kind of operator she wanted to be. Garrett poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her. In the lamplight, he looked every one of his 70 years. The cancer was eating him from the inside out, stealing the vitality that had defined him for so long. But his eyes remained sharp, focused. "I need you to finish something I started," he said without preamble. 37 years ago, Autumn set down her coffee cup. "Garrett, just listen." He pulled a manila folder from beneath a stack of newspapers and slid it across the table. "Afghanistan, 1988, Operation Silent Thunder." The folder was old, the edges worn soft. Autumn opened it to find a collection of photographs, maps, and documents that had clearly been classified at some point. The photos showed a younger Garrett, barely recognizable without the white beard, standing with a SEAL team in front of a Soviet military installation. "Panjshir Valley," Garrett said. "We were running support for the Mujahideen during the Soviet occupation. Off-the-book stuff, the kind of operations that never made it into official records." Autumn studied the photos. Garrett looked impossibly young, strong, invincible, in the way that young men in combat always seem invincible, right up until they're not. "Our target was a Soviet chemical weapons depot," Garrett continued. "Intelligence suggested they were developing something new, something catastrophic, a biological weapon codenamed Omega-7. He pulled out another photo, a woman in a lab coat, late 30s, with dark hair and intelligent eyes. She stood in what looked like a laboratory, surrounded by equipment that Autumn didn't recognize. "Dr. Yelena Volkov," Garrett said, "Soviet biochemist, genius-level intellect, and the key to Omega-7. Autumn listened as Garrett described the mission, the infiltration, the firefight, the moment he found Yelena chained in the laboratory, begging for help. She'd sabotaged the Omega-7 formula, Garrett explained, made it worthless. But she'd created the real version and hidden it, along with an antidote, somewhere in the Afghan mountains. She was married, Garrett said quietly. Colonel Dmitry Volkov, Spetsnaz commander, a true believer in the Soviet cause. When he found out Yelena had sabotaged the program, he turned on her. The next photo showed the aftermath. Yelena on the ground, blood spreading across her lab coat, Garrett kneeling beside her. The image was grainy, shot from a distance, but the emotion was unmistakable. She gave me coordinates, Garrett said. GPS numbers written on a scrap of paper, the location where she'd hidden the real Omega-7 and the antidote. And she gave me this. He pulled a small photograph from the folder. A 2-year-old girl with dark hair and serious eyes, staring at the camera with the intensity of someone much older. Her daughter, Irina. Yelena begged me to make sure Dmitri never found the coordinates, never got his hands on Omega-7. She died 30 seconds later. Autumn studied the photograph of young Irina, then looked up at Garrett. What happened to the coordinates? I reported the mission to my CIA handler, Deputy Director Lawrence Kane. He ordered me to classify everything, bury the location, said they'd retrieve Omega-7 when it was politically convenient. Garrett's voice hardened. I refused to give him the coordinates. I knew what kind of man Kane was, what he'd do with that kind of weapon. So they discharged you. Without honor, stripped my record, made it clear that if I ever talked about Operation Silent Thunder, I'd face federal charges. Garrett coughed, a deep, rattling sound that made Autumn wince. I've kept that secret for 37 years. The coordinates are in a safety deposit box in Atlanta, and I'm the only person alive who knows which bank. Autumn sat back, processing. Why are you telling me this now? Garrett reached across the table and took her hand. His skin was paper thin, the veins standing out like blue rivers. Because Dmitri Volkov just entered the United States, legally, on a veteran's visa. The words hung in the air like smoke. He's been searching for Omega-7 for nearly 4 decades, Garrett continued. And now, with Russia falling apart and his pension worthless, he's desperate. Intelligence suggests he's made contact with someone inside the U.S. military, someone who can help him find what Yelena hid. Who? Commander Thaddeus Kane. Garrett let that sink in. Lawrence Kane's son, the man who tried to wash you out this morning. Autumn's mind raced. Kane knows about Omega-7? His father told him everything before he died. Lawrence Kane was obsessed with that weapon, spent his whole career trying to find it. Now his son is picking up where he left off. Garrett coughed again, harder this time. When he pulled his hand away from his mouth, there was blood on his palm. Autumn reached for him, but he waved her off. I'm fine. Listen to me. Dmitri and Kane are planning to go to Afghanistan. They have resources, mercenaries, satellite imagery, everything I didn't have in 1988. If they get their hands on Omega-7, he didn't need to finish the sentence. A biological weapon in the hands of desperate men. The potential for catastrophe was limitless. I need you to get there first, Garrett said. Retrieve the Omega-7 and the antidote. Destroy them both. Make sure Yelena's sacrifice meant something. Autumn stared at the photographs spread across the table. A dead Soviet scientist, a Russian colonel consumed by revenge, a cache of biological weapons hidden in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Why me? She asked. Why not report this to SOCOM, to the CIA? Garrett's expression was sad, understanding. Because Kane controls the intelligence channels at Fort Benning. Because the CIA would classify this all over again and leave Omega-7 in the ground until it's convenient to retrieve. And because you're the best shooter I've ever trained. Better than any operator I worked with in 40 years. Better than your father. The mention of Dale Blackwood made Autumn's chest tighten. My father was a good Marine and a better man, Garrett interrupted. But he wasn't you, Autumn, and this mission needs you. Silence settled over the kitchen. Somewhere outside, an owl called. There's something else, Garrett said finally. His voice had changed, softer now, weighted with something that sounded like grief. Something you need to know about your father, about how he really died. Autumn felt her pulse quicken. What are you talking about? He was killed in Fallujah. IED attack on his convoy. No. Garrett's voice was barely above a whisper. Dale Blackwood was murdered by Lawrence Kane. The world tilted. Autumn gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles going white. Dale found out Kane was selling intelligence to enemy forces, Garrett continued. Battlefield positions, convoy routes, information that got American soldiers killed. Dale confronted him, threatened to go public. 3 days later, Dale's convoy was hit by an IED in a supposedly secure sector. But the blast pattern was wrong. The placement was wrong. It wasn't Taliban. It was a setup. Tears burned at the corners of Autumn's eyes. You knew this. For 21 years you knew this, and you never said anything? I couldn't prove it. Kane covered his tracks perfectly. And if I'd told you, what would you have done? Gone after him? Thrown your life away on revenge? Garrett's own eyes were wet now. Dale made me promise to take care of you, to make sure you had a future. I couldn't let you destroy that future chasing ghosts. Autumn stood, her chair scraping hard against the floor. She walked to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond. 21 years of grief. 21 years of believing her father had died serving his country. And all of it was a lie. Thaddeus Kane is his father's son, Garrett said behind her, cut from the same cloth. And if he gets his hands on Omega-7, he'll sell it to whoever pays the most, just like Lawrence did with battlefield intelligence. Autumn pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, exhausted, angry. What if I fail? She asked. Then I'll die knowing I tried. She turned to face him. Garrett sat at the table looking smaller somehow, diminished by illness and age and the weight of secrets carried for too long. I'll need a team, Autumn said. People I can trust. I have contacts, operators who owe me favors. We can put something together. When do we start? Garrett smiled, and for a moment, Autumn could see the young SEAL from the photographs. Strong, determined, unbreakable. Tomorrow, he said. We start tomorrow. The safety deposit box was in a Wells Fargo branch in downtown Atlanta, tucked between a barbecue restaurant and a law office. Garrett had rented it in 1988 under a name that didn't appear in any military database. They reached the bank at 10 in the morning. Garrett moved slowly through the lobby, leaning on Autumn's arm. The bank manager verified his identification and led them to the vault. The safety deposit box was small, unremarkable. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age. Garrett opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were two items: a strip of paper with GPS coordinates written in faded ink, and a small key stamped with Cyrillic letters. The coordinates, Garrett said, his voice barely audible. Irina Sokolov works at Emory University, Garrett said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. Biochemistry department. She's brilliant, just like her mother. You want me to contact her? We need her expertise. If the antidote has degraded over 37 years, she might be able to recreate it, and she has a right to know what her mother died trying to protect. The conversation was interrupted by Garrett's phone buzzing. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened. It's confirmed, he said. Dmitry Volkov landed in Virginia 3 days ago. Former Wagner Group mercenaries traveling with him. And Kane? Took emergency leave from Fort Benning yesterday. No details. Autumn felt the familiar pre-mission tension settling into her shoulders. The clock was ticking. I'll need a pilot, she said. Someone who can get us in and out of Afghanistan without appearing on any manifests. Garrett nodded. Captain Wyatt Donovan flew MH-47S in Afghanistan and Iraq. He and your father served together, saved Dale's life twice. Will he do it? If you ask him. Dale was like a brother to Wyatt. Garrett pulled out a worn leather journal. My field notes from 1988. Everything I remember about the depot, the terrain, the bunker layout, Dimitri's tactics, it's all in there. Autumn took the journal, feeling the weight of it. Not just the physical weight, but the history, the secrets. Garrett, she said quietly, if this goes wrong, if I don't make it back, you will, because Dale made me promise to give you a life that wasn't defined by his death, to let you become something more than just another casualty of war. He reached across the table and took her hand. And you did. You became something extraordinary. He'd be so proud of who you are. Dr. Irina Sokolov's office at Emory University occupied the third floor of a modernist concrete building. Autumn found her at 7 in the evening, still working, surrounded by equipment that hummed and blinked with quiet purpose. She looked up when Autumn knocked, dark hair pulled back, eyes the color of storm clouds. The resemblance to the photograph of Yelena Volkov was unmistakable. Dr. Sokolov? Yes. My name is Lieutenant Autumn Blackwood. I need to speak with you about your mother. The pen in Irina's hand stopped moving. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she set the pen down with great deliberation and gestured to a chair. Close the door, please. Autumn pulled out the folder Garrett had given her. Photographs, documents, the story of Operation Silent Thunder, laid out in faded ink and classified stamps. Irina studied each page with careful attention. When she reached the photograph of Yelena lying on the ground, blood spreading across her lab coat, her hand trembled slightly. My mother was murdered, Irina said. It wasn't a question. She was trying to stop a biological weapon from being deployed, a weapon called Omega-7. I know about Omega-7. Irina's voice was flat, controlled. My mother wrote letters before she died, hidden letters that reached me years later after the Soviet Union collapsed. She told me what they'd forced her to create, what she'd done to stop it. Autumn leaned forward. Did she tell you where she hid the pathogen and the antidote? No, only that she'd ensured they would never fall into the wrong hands. Irina looked up, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. And she told me about the American SEAL who tried to save her, a man named Garrett Hawthorne. He's the one who sent me. Is he alive? Yes, but not for much longer. He has cancer, stage 4. Irina absorbed this news with a small nod. My mother wrote that he was a good man. Autumn explained the situation. Dmitry Volkov's arrival in the United States, Commander Kane's involvement, the plan to retrieve Omega-7 and sell it to the highest bidder. My father, Irina said, and the word carried a weight of bitterness. Dmitry Volkov. I haven't seen him since I was 7 years old. After my mother died, he abandoned me. She stood, walked to the window. He doesn't know I'm in America, doesn't know I followed my mother's work into biochemistry. I need your help, Autumn said. The antidote has been buried for 37 years. If it's degraded, we need someone who can recreate it. You're asking me to go to Afghanistan? Yes. Irina turned from the window. When do we leave? 48 hours. I've been thinking about this for 32 years, ever since I was old enough to understand what my mother died for. Irina's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I will see my mother's work finished. Captain Wyatt Donovan lived in a small house near Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah. Autumn drove through the night to reach him, arriving just after dawn. Wyatt answered the door in sweatpants and a faded Army t-shirt. He was pushing 40, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples. He took one look at Autumn, and his expression shifted. My God, you look just like Dale. They sat on the porch with coffee. Wyatt listened without interrupting as Autumn explained the mission. When she finished, Wyatt stared at his coffee cup for a long time. Your father saved my life twice, he said finally. I told him I'd owe him forever. I never got the chance to pay that debt. This is your chance. Wyatt nodded slowly. I've got an MH-47 Chinook, off the books. It won't be comfortable, but it'll get us there. How soon can you be ready? 48 hours. The next 40 hours passed in a blur of preparation, equipment acquisition, route planning, communication protocols. Autumn coordinated everything from a cheap motel room outside Atlanta. Garrett called twice, the first time to provide updated intelligence, the second time just to hear her voice. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're lying. You always get quiet when you're scared." Autumn smiled despite herself. "Maybe a little scared." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. It's overconfidence that gets you killed." Garrett coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I wish I could be there with you." "You are. You trained me for this." "Your father had it too. That quality that separates good operators from great ones." "Garrett, if something happens, you'll make it back. You're too stubborn not to." At 0300 hours, she received a text, just a photograph. Commander Kane standing next to a private jet. Behind him, clearly visible, was an older man with steel gray hair and a scarred face. Dmitry Volkov. They were moving. Autumn, Irina, and Wyatt met at a private airstrip in rural Georgia at dawn. The Chinook sat on the tarmac, its twin rotors folded back, its olive drab paint job faded but functional. Irina arrived with 2 duffel bags. One contained clothes. The other held chemical analysis tools, portable lab equipment. She looked at the helicopter and raised an eyebrow. "This is what we're flying halfway around the world in?" "Chinooks are workhorses," Wyatt said. "Ugly, loud, but reliable." They loaded equipment while Wyatt ran final pre-flight checks. Autumn had acquired weapons through channels Garrett had provided. M4 carbines, a Barrett M107.50 caliber rifle. Enough ammunition to fight a small war. They lifted off at 0700 hours, the Chinook's rotors beating the air into submission. The flight plan would take them east across the Atlantic, with refueling stops in Iceland, Turkey, and Pakistan. Total flight time, approximately 36 hours. Autumn sat in the cargo bay, checking and rechecking her equipment. The Barrett M107 lay across her lap, 50 pounds of precision engineering. Irina settled beside her, looking pale. "I've never been good with flying." "Try not to think about it." They flew through the day and into the night. Over the Atlantic, over Iceland, where they refueled at a remote airstrip. Over Turkey, where the mountains rose like broken teeth. Somewhere over the Mediterranean, Irina asked the question Autumn had been expecting. "What will you do if we encounter my father?" Autumn considered her response carefully. "I'll give him one chance to stand down. And if he doesn't, then I'll neutralize the threat." Irina was quiet for a moment. "You should know something about Dmitry Volkov. He's not a man who walks away. Not from anything." "Then he's made his choice. Will you kill him?" "If I have to, yes." "Good." Irina's voice was cold. "He stopped being my father the day he abandoned me." They landed in Pakistan for the final refueling stop, a small airfield in Peshawar. While Wyatt coordinated, Autumn and Irina stretched their legs. "We're close now," Irina said, staring east toward the mountains. "Afghanistan is just beyond those peaks." "Nervous?" "Terrified, but also relieved. I've spent my entire adult life wondering about my mother's final moments. Now I'll finally know." They lifted off Peshawar at midnight, flying low and dark across the Pakistani border into Afghanistan. The mountains rose around them like ancient guardians, their peaks touched with snow that glowed silver in the moonlight. "Coordinates coming up," Wyatt announced. 5 minutes to target." Autumn moved to the open cargo door, scanning the terrain below through night vision goggles. The Panjshir Valley spread out beneath them, a ribbon of darkness winding through the mountains. Soviet-era ruins dotted the landscape. "There," she said, pointing to a cluster of structures on a ridgeline. "The old chemical depot." Wyatt brought the Chinook around in a wide circle. "Best I can do is a hover insertion. You'll have to rope down." They rigged fast ropes while Wyatt held the Chinook in a steady hover. The rotor wash kicked up dust and debris. Autumn went first, sliding down the rope with practiced ease. Irina followed, slower, more careful. Autumn caught her as she reached the bottom. "You okay?" "Fantastic. Remind me never to do that again." Wyatt's voice crackled over their radio headsets. "I'll orbit at a safe distance. Call when you need extraction." The Chinook pulled away. Suddenly the silence was immense, just wind and the distant sound of rocks shifting. "The coordinates put us 200 meters northeast," Autumn said, consulting her GPS. "Stay close." They moved through the ruins carefully. The terrain was treacherous. Autumn led, her M4 carbine at the ready. Behind them, Irina struggled with the altitude and terrain, but she kept moving, determined. They reached the coordinates after 15 minutes, a collapsed bunker entrance half buried in scree. Soviet construction, concrete reinforced with steel. Autumn pulled out a tactical flashlight and swept the beam inside. Stone steps leading down. "This is it," she said. They descended carefully. The bunker had been designed as a chemical storage facility. Thick walls. The air smelled of mineral and decay. At the bottom of the stairs, a corridor stretched into darkness. Autumn followed the GPS coordinates deeper into the complex. Finally, they reached a heavy door marked with Cyrillic warnings. Radiation. Biological hazard. Autumn pulled out the small key Garrett had given her. She inserted it and turned. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Beyond was a small chamber, clean, sealed. In the center, on a concrete pedestal, sat a steel case marked with more Cyrillic warnings. Irina moved forward, her hands trembling. She opened the case with reverence. Inside were 2 vials, one filled with dark red liquid, one with clear blue. "Omega-7, Irina whispered, "and the antidote." She pulled out a portable analyzer and began running tests. Autumn stood guard at the door. Minutes passed. Finally, Irina looked up. "The pathogen is still viable, remarkably stable. The antidote appears intact also. Can we transport them safely?" "Yes, the case is lead-lined. As long as we don't break the vials." The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the silence, distant but growing closer. Autumn's blood went cold. "We've got company." Wyatt's voice crackled over the radio. "Frost, we've got inbound contacts. 3 Mi-8s, Russian manufacture, heading straight for your position." "How long?" 2 minutes, maybe less." Autumn turned to Irina. "Pack it up, we're leaving, now." Irina secured the vials in the steel case. Autumn grabbed it and led them back through the bunker at a run. The sound of helicopters grew louder. They emerged from the bunker entrance just as the first Mi-8 swept over the ridgeline. Searchlights stabbed through the darkness. The helicopter circled, then began to descend, touching down 300 meters away. Doors opened. Men poured out, at least a dozen. Armed with AK-103s, moving with military precision, Wagner Group mercenaries. "Wyatt, we need extraction," Autumn said into her radio. "Hot LZ, multiple hostiles." "On my way, 60 seconds." 60 seconds, an eternity in combat. The mercenaries spread out, moving toward the bunker in a tactical formation. Autumn found cover behind a collapsed concrete wall and brought up her M4. Irina crouched beside her, clutching the steel case. "Stay down," Autumn ordered. The first mercenary came into range. 600 yards. Autumn let him get closer. 500, 400. Then she opened fire. The M4 barked in controlled bursts. The lead mercenary went down, then another, then a third. The formation scattered, seeking cover, returning fire. Bullets snapped through the air. Autumn shifted position, staying mobile. She dropped 2 more mercenaries with precise headshots. The others had found cover now, laying down suppressing fire. "Wyatt, where are you?" 30 seconds. The sound of the Chinook's rotors grew audible. The mercenaries heard it too. Half of them turned their attention skyward. That's when Autumn made her move. She broke cover, sprinting toward a better firing position. The Barrett M107 came off her back. She dropped prone behind a low wall, settling the rifle's bipod. Through the scope, she acquired targets. Range, 700 yards. The first shot took a mercenary through the chest. The .50 caliber round hit like a freight train. The second shot disabled an RPG gunner. The third destroyed an ammunition crate, causing a secondary explosion. The Chinook roared overhead, Wyatt bringing it in low and fast. Ropes dropped from the cargo bay. "Move!" Autumn shouted to Irina. Irina ran for the ropes, the steel case clutched to her chest. Autumn provided covering fire, the Barrett thundering. Each shot a kill. Irina reached the ropes and started climbing. Autumn fired 3 more shots, then slung the Barrett and sprinted for the extraction point. Bullets chased her. She grabbed the rope and climbed, hand over hand. Below, the mercenaries concentrated fire on the Chinook. Rounds pinged off the armored hull. Autumn hauled herself into the cargo bay just as Wyatt pulled the helicopter into a steep climb. Irina lay on the floor, gasping. The steel case sat beside her, intact. "Everyone accounted for?" Wyatt called. "We're good. Go." The Chinook banked hard. Tracer fire followed them into the darkness, but the angle was wrong. Within seconds, they were clear. Autumn lay on the cargo bay floor, her heart hammering. They'd done it. Retrieved the Omega-7, survived the first contact, but one thought kept circulating. The mercenaries had known exactly where to go, had arrived within minutes of Autumn's team reaching the bunker. Someone had told them where to look. Autumn pulled out her satellite phone and dialed Garrett's number. It rang, and rang. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Cold dread settled into her stomach. She switched to a different frequency, called an emergency contact number. A voice answered. "Secure line. This is Blackwood. I need a wellness check on Master Chief Hawthorne, North Carolina address. Stand by." Minutes passed. Finally, the voice came back. Local PD responded. Subject is not responding. Medics are entering now. Autumn waited, barely breathing. "I'm sorry, subject is deceased. Preliminary assessment suggests natural causes. Heart failure." The phone slipped from Autumn's fingers. Garrett was gone. The man who trained her, protected her, loved her like a daughter. Dead. Irina looked over, saw Autumn's expression, and understood. She moved closer, putting a hand on Autumn's shoulder. For a long time, Autumn sat in the dark cargo bay, surrounded by weapons and the smell of gun oil, and the steady thrum of rotors. She didn't cry. The grief was too big, too raw. Finally, she picked up the satellite phone and made one more call. The emergency contact Garrett had given her. A voice answered after one ring. "Garrett Hawthorne is dead," Autumn said, "and I need to know if Commander Thaddeus Kane and Colonel Dmitry Volkov are still in Afghanistan. Stand by." When the voice returned, it carried information that made Autumn's blood run cold. Negative. Both subjects departed Afghanistan 4 hours ago. Current location, United States. A private estate in Virginia. Our surveillance indicates they're holding a meeting. Potential arms deal negotiation. Send me the coordinates. Are you certain? This falls outside authorized operations. Send me the coordinates. A pause, then, transmitted. Good hunting, Lieutenant. Autumn looked at Irina, at the steel case containing Omega-7, at the weapons scattered around the cargo bay. Change of plans, she said to Wyatt over the intercom. We're not going home yet. Plot a course for Virginia. What's in Virginia? The people who killed Garrett. The people who want to turn your mother's weapon into a commodity. Wyatt was silent for a moment. Then, coordinates locked in, ETA 14 hours. Autumn began field stripping her weapons, cleaning them, preparing them. The grief was still there, massive and terrible. But beneath it, something else was growing. A cold, focused rage. Garrett had given her a mission, to stop Omega-7 from falling into the wrong hands. She would complete that mission, and anyone who stood in her way would learn exactly what kind of operator Master Chief Garrett Hawthorne had trained. The estate sat on 200 acres of Virginia countryside, hidden behind walls and gates and expensive security. Autumn observed it through binoculars from a wooded ridgeline half a mile away. Wyatt had landed the Chinook at an abandoned airstrip 30 miles south, then driven them here in a rental SUV. 12 guards visible, Wyatt said. Professional setup. Wagner Group, Autumn said. Same mercenaries from Afghanistan. Which means Kane and Volkov are definitely here. Irina crouched behind them, the steel case in a backpack at her feet. She'd been quiet since learning about Garrett's death. "What's the plan?" she asked. Autumn lowered her binoculars. The sun was setting. In 2 hours, it would be fully dark. "I go in alone," Autumn said. "Locate Kane and Volkov. Secure whatever intelligence they have. Then extract." "And us?" "You stay here with Wyatt. If I'm not back in 2 hours, you leave. Get the Omega-7 to the CDC. Destroy it properly." Wyatt shook his head. "You'll be outnumbered." "I've been outnumbered before." "Not like this." Autumn met his eyes. "So am I." She began checking her equipment. The M4 carbine, suppressed pistol, combat knife, flash grenades. The Barrett M107 stayed behind, too heavy for close quarters work. Irina watched her prepare. "My father is in there. When you find him, what will you do?" "Give him a chance to surrender." "He won't." "Then I'll do what needs to be done." "Will you make him suffer?" Autumn paused. "No. When it's time, it'll be clean, quick, professional." Irina nodded slowly. "Thank you." As darkness fell, Autumn moved through the woods toward the estate perimeter. She'd blackened her face, wore dark clothing without insignia, carried weapons that couldn't be traced. The perimeter fence was 12 feet of chain link topped with razor wire. Security cameras covered the obvious approach angles, but Autumn had identified a blind spot. She scaled the fence in the darkness. On the other side, she dropped into a crouch and waited. A guard patrol passed 50 meters away. 2 men. AK-103S. Night vision goggles. Professional, alert, but predictable. Autumn waited for them to complete their circuit, then moved toward the main house. Colonial-style mansion, white columns, tall windows, lights blazed on the ground floor. She circled to the rear, a door marked for deliveries. She tested the handle. Locked. She pulled out a lockpick set. 30 seconds later, the lock clicked open. Inside was a service corridor, concrete floors, bare walls. Autumn moved through it quietly, her suppressed pistol drawn. Voices echoed from somewhere ahead, men speaking Russian. She followed the sound to a door, pressing her ear against it. Multiple speakers, at least 5, discussing logistics, transportation, payment schedules. Autumn eased the door open a crack. Beyond was a large study, expensive furniture, oil paintings, a fireplace, and in the center, standing around a mahogany table, were the people she'd come to find. Commander Thaddeus Kane. Beside him, Colonel Dmitry Volkov. 70 years old but still imposing. Steel gray hair, scars, eyes like frozen lakes. 3 other men, arms dealers judging by their conversation, Middle Eastern, well-dressed. On the table between them sat a laptop displaying satellite imagery of the Afghan bunker. Beside it, photographs, documents, and something that made Autumn's blood freeze. A vial of red liquid. Kane was speaking. "The pathogen is confirmed viable, deploy ready, capable of contaminating a major water supply within hours." One of the arms dealers leaned closer. "And the antidote?" "Separate sale," Kane said smoothly. "You buy the weapon, you buy the cure." "Price?" $50 million for the pathogen, another 50 for the antidote. Dmitry Volkov spoke, his English heavily accented. "My wife died creating this, her genius, her sacrifice, and you reduce it to a transaction." Kane shrugged. Your wife was a Soviet scientist following orders. I'm an American entrepreneur recognizing opportunity. You have no honor. Honor doesn't pay mortgages, Colonel. Autumn had heard enough. She keyed her radio, whispering to Wyatt. Multiple hostiles. I'm going to need that extraction sooner than planned. How soon? 10 minutes, maybe less. Autumn. Watch me. She pulled a flash grenade from her vest. This was going to be loud, violent. She kicked open the door and threw the flash grenade. The explosion was deafening, blinding light, concussive force. The men reeled back. Autumn moved through the door. Her suppressed pistol coughed twice. 2 guards flanking the entrance dropped. She shifted aim, fired again. One of the arms dealers went down. Kane dove behind a desk. Volkov moved with startling speed toward a side exit. The remaining dealers scattered. Autumn crossed to the table and grabbed the vial. Red liquid sloshed inside. She examined it and realized it wasn't omega-7. The viscosity was wrong, the color off. This was a fake, which meant the real pathogen was still... A gunshot cracked. Pain exploded in Autumn's left shoulder. She spun, dropping behind cover. Kane had recovered, firing from behind the desk. Blood spread across Autumn's shirt. The wound wasn't critical, but it hurt. She returned fire, forcing Kane to duck, then moved toward the side exit Volkov had used. The corridor beyond was chaos. Alarms blaring, guards responding. Autumn ran, shoulder screaming. She burst through a door into a private study. Smaller, a desk covered in papers, filing cabinets. Standing by the window was Dmitry Volkov. He held a steel case, the same type Irina had secured in Afghanistan. His hand rested on the latch. Stop, Autumn said, raising her pistol. Volkov turned slowly. Up close, she could see the weight of years in his face, the accumulated grief and rage. You must be the American girl, he said, the one my daughter is helping. Put down the case. Why? So you can destroy what my wife created? Your wife created an antidote, a cure. The pathogen was forced on her. You know nothing about Yelena. Volkov's voice cracked. She was brilliant, beautiful, and they ruined her. The KGB, the Soviet system. Then honor her memory. Don't let her work become a tool for murder. Honor? Volkov laughed bitterly. I am beyond honor. 37 years I have searched, and now, finally, I can complete what she began. She sabotaged omega-7 to stop people like you. She sabotaged it because she chose that American SEAL over her duty, over me. The words hung between them. Autumn saw it then, the real wound. Not Yelena's death, but the knowledge that his wife had loved someone else. Garrett Hawthorne was a better man than you, Autumn said quietly. Volkov's hand moved toward his pistol. Autumn fired first. The shot took him in the chest. Center mass, professional, clean. Volkov staggered back against the window, the steel case slipping from his fingers. He looked down at the spreading red stain, then back up at Autumn. Irina, he whispered, tell her I'm sorry. He collapsed. The window behind him shattered. Glass cascaded into the darkness. And Dmitry Volkov, Soviet war hero and broken man, died staring at a ceiling in a country he'd spent his life hating. Autumn grabbed the steel case and ran. The hallway was full of guards. She engaged them as she moved, firing precisely. Controlled bursts. The wound in her shoulder made her aim slightly off, but training compensated. She fought through the house, room by room. Guards fell. She didn't keep count, just moved forward. In what had been a dining room, she found Kane. He stood behind an overturned table. His pistol tracked her movement. They stared at each other across 20 feet. Your father killed Dale Blackwood, Autumn said. Garrett told me everything. Kane's expression didn't change. My father did what was necessary. Blackwood was going to expose classified operations. Your father was selling intelligence to the enemy, getting Americans killed for profit. That's a matter of perspective. Kane fired. Autumn dove. The bullet passed through the space where her head had been. She rolled, came up firing. Kane ducked. "You can't win this," he called out. "Then I'll die taking you with me." She flanked him, moving through a side door into a kitchen. She circled back, coming up behind Kane's position. He saw her at the last second, turned, fired. Autumn felt the bullet crease her ribs, pain, bright and sharp. But she didn't stop. She closed the distance and hit him with the full weight of her body. They went down together, weapons scattering. Kane was bigger, stronger. But Autumn had been trained by a man who'd forgotten more about hand-to-hand combat than most people ever learned. She trapped his arm, rolled him, got her forearm across his throat, and applied pressure. Kane struggled. His face turned red, then purple. His hands clawed at her arm. Autumn held on, her own blood dripping onto his shirt, her shoulder screaming. Kane's movements grew weaker, then slack. Autumn held the choke for 5 more seconds. Then she released him and checked for a pulse. Nothing. Commander Thaddeus Kane was dead. Autumn retrieved the steel case and stumbled toward the nearest exit. Her vision was starting to blur. Blood loss. Shock. She made it to the grounds, heard the approaching sound of the Chinook's rotors. Wyatt, coming in despite the danger. Autumn ran toward the extraction point, bullets kicking up dirt. The Chinook descended, ropes dropping. She grabbed one and held on as Wyatt pulled them skyward. Guards fired from below. Tracer rounds streaked through the darkness. One caught the Chinook's tail rotor. Alarms blared. The helicopter lurched. "We're hit," Wyatt shouted. "I can't maintain altitude." "Get us clear of the estate, then put us down anywhere." Wyatt fought the controls. They made it a mile, maybe 2. Then the alarms crescendoed. "Brace for impact!" The Chinook hit hard in a field. The impact threw Autumn across the cargo bay. Metal screamed, glass shattered. Then, silence. Autumn dragged herself upright. Her shoulder was agony. Her ribs felt broken, but she was alive. She checked the steel case. Intact. "Wyatt?" "Here." His voice came from the cockpit. "Banged up but functional." "Irina?" "I'm okay." Irina emerged from where she'd been thrown. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. They evacuated the crashed Chinook and moved into the woods. Behind them, sirens. Emergency services responding. "The emergency contact," Autumn said to Wyatt. "Can you reach them?" Wyatt pulled out his satellite phone and dialed. "Extraction needed," he said, reading off GPS coordinates. 3 personnel, 1 critically wounded, high-value cargo. He listened, then nodded. "Understood. We'll be ready." He ended the call. "Black helicopter inbound. ETA 20 minutes. They'll take us to a secure location." Autumn sank down against a tree, the steel case in her lap. 20 minutes. She could last 20 minutes. Irina knelt beside her, examining the shoulder wound. "You need a hospital. After we secure the Omega-7. Irina shook her head but fashioned a crude pressure bandage from torn shirt strips. They waited in the darkness. The Virginia countryside was peaceful, quiet. The black helicopter arrived exactly on schedule. No markings, no identification. Armed personnel in unmarked tactical gear secured the perimeter. A woman in civilian clothes approached. 50, gray hair, eyes that had seen things. "Lieutenant Blackwood?" "Yes. I knew Garrett Hawthorne, served with him in the 90s. He was a good man." She gestured to the helicopter. "Let's get you somewhere safe." They flew to a facility that didn't officially exist. Underground, secure. Medical personnel treated Autumn's wounds. The shoulder required surgery. The ribs were cracked but would heal. While she recovered, Irina worked with CDC specialists to verify and destroy the Omega-7 pathogen. The antidote was preserved, its formula documented, then locked away. 2 weeks passed. The gray-haired woman visited Autumn in recovery. "The official story is that Commander Kane died in a private plane crash," she said. Colonel Volkov's body was found in the wreckage of the Virginia estate, which burned to the ground in what authorities are calling an accidental fire. And Garrett? Master Chief Hawthorne's death has been ruled natural causes. He'll be buried at Arlington with full honors. Autumn closed her eyes. It wasn't justice, but it was something. What happens to me? That depends. How do you feel about continuing to operate in the shadows? Missions that don't officially exist. Like Garrett did? Exactly. Autumn was quiet. Then, I'll do it on one condition. Name it. I want to train the next generation, SEAL candidates. I want to make sure they're ready. The woman smiled. I think we can arrange that. 6 months later, Lieutenant Commander Autumn Blackwood stood in front of 50 new BUD/S candidates at Fort Benning. Among them were 4 women. The tallest raised her hand. Ma'am, do women really belong in Tier 1 operations? Autumn walked to the wall where the sniper record board hung. Her name occupied the top position. Longest confirmed kill, 16 total in a single operation. Details classified. I earned my place, she said. You'll earn yours. The only thing that matters is whether you can do the job when it counts. She looked out at the candidates, saw their doubt, their determination, their fear. My instructor once told me that the strongest warriors aren't those who always win. They're the ones who rise after every fall. She paused. Master Chief Garrett Hawthorne taught me that, and everything else I know about being a SEAL. After the session, she drove to Arlington National Cemetery, found 2 graves side by side, fresh headstones, flowers she'd placed the week before, still fresh. Master Chief Garrett Hawthorne, Navy SEAL, Silver Star, Dr. Yelena Volkov, scientist, hero. Garrett's body had been returned from North Carolina. Yelena's remains had been recovered from Afghanistan and repatriated. Now they rested together, these 2 people who'd loved each other for one brief moment in 1987. Autumn placed new flowers on both graves. She stood at attention and saluted. I finished it, she said quietly. The mission, Omega-7, is destroyed. The people who wanted to use it are dead. You can rest now. The wind stirred the trees. Somewhere, a bird sang. Autumn thought about Irina, now working at the CDC, using her mother's brilliance to save lives. About Wyatt, returned to civilian life, finally at peace with Dale Blackwood's memory. About all the people who'd been touched by this mission. And she thought about herself, about who she'd been 6 months ago and who she'd become, the daughter of 3 parents. Dale Blackwood, who'd raised her, Garrett Hawthorne, who'd trained her, and Yelena Volkov, whose sacrifice had shaped everything. She would carry them all forward, into whatever missions came next, whatever darkness needed to be faced. Because that's what operators did. They rose after every fall. They finished what others started. They stood in the gap between the world as it was and the world as it should be. Autumn Blackwood walked away from the graves as the sun set over Arlington. The eternal flame burned nearby, honoring the fallen. She had paid that cost, would continue paying it for as long as she wore the uniform. But she wore it proudly because she'd learned what Garrett had tried to teach her, that strength without honor meant nothing, that duty without sacrifice was hollow, and that the greatest legacy wasn't what you achieved for yourself, but what you inspired in others. Autumn drove back to Fort Benning through the gathering darkness, ready for tomorrow's training session, ready for the next mission, ready for whatever came next. The warrior's path stretched ahead of her, long and uncertain, but she walked it with her head high and her purpose clear, just as Garrett had taught her, just as her father would have wanted. The Iron Daughter, forged in fire and loss, carrying forward the lessons of those who'd fallen so that others might rise.